It was 2 a.m. in the suburbs of Ohio. The kind of silence that usually feels peaceful felt like a heavy shroud tonight. They say fire cleanses, but as I watched my world turn into embers, I knew it only consumed. 2 years ago, my life was the American dream. A modest house with a white picket fence, a hard-working mother, and my younger sister, Chloe. We weren't rich, but we were whole. My father had left us the house, and a small portion of his tech firm's shares before he passed, our only safety net. But greed is a predator that doesn't care about bloodlines. My uncle Arthur and his son Leo were the wolves at our door. Arthur was a high-profile corporate lawyer, a man who knew how to twist the law into a noose. He wanted those shares to gain a majority stake in the firm. He didn't ask, he demanded. I remember that cold November evening. Arthur sat in our living room sipping expensive bourbon, his eyes cold like flint. Sign the transfer, Sarah, he told my mother, his voice smooth like oil. A woman like you can't handle the boardrooms. Take the payout and move to the countryside. My mother, with all the grace of a queen, refused. She knew those shares were my and Chloe's future. She told him to leave our house and never return, that no was our death warrant. A week later, the tragedy struck. It wasn't an accident. I woke up to the screech of a smoke alarm and the smell of gasoline, an accelerant. The fire had started at the front and back exits simultaneously. It was a professional hit disguised as an electrical short. I managed to throw Chloe out of the second-story window into the rose bushes below. But when I turned back for my mother, the hallway collapsed in a roar of orange fury. I screamed her name until my lungs burned, but the ceiling gave way. As I stumbled out of the house, coughing blood and ash, I saw a black Cadillac Escalade parked at the end of the street. The window rolled down just an inch. I saw Arthur's silhouette. He wasn't calling 911. He was watching. Beside him, Leo was recording the blaze on his phone, a smirk visible in the glow of our burning home. In that moment, as the sirens wailed in the distance and my mother's screams faded into the crackle of burning wood, the boy I was died. The ash didn't just cover my skin, it seeped into my soul. Arthur had the money, the law, and the power. I had nothing but a sister to protect and a burning hole where my heart used to be. But I made a vow right there, standing in my pajamas on the cold asphalt. I wouldn't just take him to court. I would take everything he loved. I would become the ghost that haunts his nightmares. After the fire, the world moved on. The police report called it a tragic electrical malfunction. The insurance money? Arthur's legal team tied it up in probate court for months until we were penniless. Chloe and I ended up in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in the grittiest part of Cincinnati. She cried in her sleep every night, smelling smoke that wasn't there. I didn't cry. I didn't have the luxury of grief. I had a mission. I knew I couldn't walk up to Arthur and pull a trigger. That would be too quick, too merciful. He loved his reputation, his wealth, and his legacy. To truly destroy him, I had to become someone who didn't exist. I had to become a shadow in the very system he thought he controlled. For the first 6 months, I worked 3 dead-end jobs. By day, I was a janitor at a high-end law firm, not Arthur's, but a rival's. I wasn't just cleaning floors, I was listening. I watched how lawyers moved, how they hid assets, and how they exploited the gray areas of the law. At night, I sat in the glow of a refurbished laptop I'd bought from a pawn shop, diving into the corners of the internet that Google doesn't index. I taught myself the language of the digital underworld. I learned about shell companies in the Cayman Islands, encrypted ledgers, and the art of social engineering, the ability to manipulate people into giving up their darkest secrets. Every cent I saved went into building my arsenal. I didn't buy guns, I bought information. I tracked Arthur's every move. I mapped out his routines, his mistress's apartment, his son Leo's gambling debts in illegal underground poker rooms, and most importantly, the fraudulent offshore accounts Arthur used to skim money from his firm. My transformation wasn't just digital, it was physical. I spent my early mornings in a basement boxing gym, hitting the bag until my knuckles bled. I needed to be fast, I needed to be invisible, and I needed to be disciplined. I lost 20 pounds of boyhood and replaced it with lean, hard muscle and a cold, calculating gaze. I stopped being the nephew he remembered. I shaved my head, grew a rugged beard, and adopted a new name, Vance. By the end of the first year, I had successfully breached the server of Arthur's law firm. It took me 4 months of fishing his careless junior associates, but I finally had it, the red folder. It contained the evidence of the arson, the emails to the fixer who set my house on fire. Arthur was arrogant enough to keep a digital trail, thinking his encryption was unbreakable. He was wrong. But I wasn't ready to go to the FBI yet. The FBI can be bought. The law can be manipulated by men like him. I wanted to see him lose his mind first. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in, just like the walls of my mother's bedroom that night. I started small. A leaked memo here, a frozen bank account there. I made him think he had a mole in his office. I watched through his own webcam as he yelled at his staff, his face turning a panicked shade of purple. I was the ghost in his machine, the glitch in his perfect life. I spent 1,000 hours planning the execution. I knew exactly when he would be at his most vulnerable, the anniversary of the firm's merger, a night where all his high society friends would be watching. I remember looking at myself in the cracked mirror of my tiny bathroom. The man looking back wasn't the kid who loved comic books and Sunday brunches. He was a weapon, forged in the fire Arthur had started. I whispered to the reflection, "It's time to collect the debt, Uncle." Note, a heavy, dark synth beat kicks in, building tension. The stage was set. The players were in place. Arthur thought he was celebrating his greatest victory, but he had no idea he was walking into a graveyard I had spent 2 years digging. The night of the Everett and Associates anniversary gala. The grand ballroom of the Hilton was a sea of black tuxedos and silk gowns. In the center of it all stood Arthur, the king of his own twisted hill, basking in the light of crystal chandeliers. He looked invincible. He looked like a man who had forgotten the smell of burning wood. I wasn't invited, but Vance didn't need an invitation. I was wearing a waiter's uniform I'd intercepted an hour ago. With a tray of drinks and a hidden earpiece, I moved through the crowd like a virus. Phase 1, isolation, I whispered into the mic hidden in my collar. My first target wasn't Arthur. It was Leo, his weak-willed son. I found him in the VIP lounge, already 3 drinks deep and bragging about his new Ferrari. I slipped a small, odorless tablet into his fresh glass as I passed. 10 minutes later, Leo was stumbling toward the executive washrooms, his stomach turning. I followed him in. The moment the door locked, the waiter persona dropped. I grabbed him by the throat and pinned him against the cold marble wall. The fear in his eyes was delicious. He didn't recognize me, the beard, the scars, the hollowed-out eyes, but he felt the predator. "Where's the offshore ledger, Leo?" I hissed. I don't know what you're... I pressed a thumb into a pressure point on his neck. "Your gambling debts to the DeMarco family? I bought them. You don't owe them anymore. You owe me. And I'm much less patient than the mob." He broke in 30 seconds. He gave me the secondary password for his father's encrypted cloud drive, the one Arthur thought only he and his son knew. I dropped him like a sack of garbage and walked out. Leo wouldn't be leaving that bathroom for a long time. Phase 2, the collapse. I slipped into the security room. The guard was distracted by the feet of the party. A quick strike to the temple, and he was out. I sat at the console. My fingers flew across the keys, uploading the red folder not to a private server, but to the ballroom's main projector system. Outside, the music stopped. I watched through the security cameras. The giant screen behind Arthur, which was supposed to show a tribute to his career, suddenly flickered. Instead of photos of his charity work, a series of emails appeared. Subject: the Cleveland property. Message: make sure the fire looks like an accident. No survivors. The room went dead silent. Arthur's face turned from a triumphant red to a sickly, ghostly white. He turned around, staring at his own handwriting on the 40-foot screen. The socialites began to whisper, then gasp. "What is this?" Arthur roared, his voice cracking. Someone shut this off. But I wasn't done. I hit the final key. Every phone in that room, every senator, every judge, every journalist received a simultaneous file transfer. It was the bank records, millions of dollars diverted from the firm into his personal accounts. I walked out of the security room and back into the ballroom. I didn't hide anymore. I walked straight through the center of the crowd. People parted for me like the Red Sea. I wasn't a waiter now. I had stripped off the jacket to reveal a black tactical shirt. Arthur saw me coming. He looked at me, squinting, trying to find the boy and the man. Then his eyes widened. He saw my mother's eyes in mine. "You," he breathed, trembling. "The ghosts are here, Uncle," I said, my voice echoing in the silent hall. And they brought the bill. Just then, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open. Not the police, but Arthur's creditors and the board of directors he had cheated. They didn't come for justice. They came for their money. The hunt was over. Arthur wasn't a king anymore. He was a cornered rat, stripped of his wealth, his son's loyalty, and his reputation in front of the very people he spent his life trying to impress. But the real confrontation wasn't going to happen here. It was going to happen where it all began. The law was coming for him, but I was faster. As the chaos erupted, Arthur bolted for the service exit. He thought he was escaping. He didn't realize I was funneling him exactly where I wanted him to go. Arthur didn't run to the police. He didn't run to his lawyers. He ran to the only place he thought I wouldn't look, the charred, overgrown lot where our house once stood. Maybe he thought he'd hidden a backup drive there, or maybe he just wanted to hide in the shadows of his greatest crime. He was stumbling through the weeds, his $5,000 tuxedo torn and covered in ash from the old foundation. He reached the center of what used to be our living room and stopped. I was already there, sitting on the only thing left, the blackened remains of my mother's favorite cast iron bench. I was holding a flare, its red glow casting long, demonic shadows across the ruins. "Going somewhere, Uncle?" My voice was a low growl that cut through the wind. Arthur jumped, falling backward into the dirt. He scrambled away, his hands scraping against the jagged stones. "Vance, please, let's talk. I have more money, millions in a Swiss account I didn't tell the board about. It's yours. Just get me out of the country." I stood up, the flare hissing in my hand. "You think this is about money? You think I spent 700 days in the dark because I wanted a bigger bank account?" I walked toward him, each step deliberate. "I remember the heat, Arthur. I remember the sound of the beams cracking. I remember the way the air tasted like gasoline and skin. You didn't just kill my mother, you tried to erase us. It was just business." He shrieked, tears finally breaking through his facade of arrogance. The firm was failing. I needed the shares to save it. I didn't mean for her to stay inside. "Liar," I roared, the sound echoing off the neighboring houses. "You sat in your car and watched. You let Leo record it. You didn't want a business deal, you wanted a sacrifice." I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him to the spot where the hallway had collapsed. I shoved the flare inches from his face. The heat made him scream, a high-pitched, pathetic sound. For a second I saw it, the urge to drop the flare, to let him feel the fire he had unleashed on us. My hand trembled. The monster I had built inside me for 2 years was screaming for blood. "Do it," Arthur cried, his spirit finally breaking. "Just end it. Kill me." I looked into his eyes, shattered, empty, and terrified. I looked at my own hands covered in the same soot that had been there 2 years ago. If I killed him here, the fire would never truly go out. I would be the one trapped in this house forever, and Arthur would be the one who finally escaped through death. I dropped my grip. He fell into a heap, sobbing into the dirt. "No," I whispered. "Death is too easy for you. You don't get to be a martyr. You're going to stay alive, Arthur. You're going to live every single day knowing that the world sees you for the pathetic, greedy coward you are. You're going to rot in a cell where the only thing you'll have to look at is the ghost of the man you could have been." I heard the sirens then, not the distant ones from the gala, but the ones I had called to this specific coordinate. The red and blue lights began to dance over the charred wood. "You're done, Uncle. The American dream is over." I walked away from the ruins, never looking back. For the first time in 2 years, the smell of smoke was gone. But as I reached the edge of the lot, something happened that I hadn't planned for. Something that would change the meaning of justice forever. 3 months passed. The trial was the biggest scandal in the state's history. Arthur was stripped of his license, his assets were frozen, and he was facing 20 years for arson and racketeering. Leo had turned state's witness to save his own skin, leaving his father to rot alone. I was sitting on a bench in a quiet park, watching Chloe play. For the first time, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. The Gray Oak justice had been served, or so I thought. A letter arrived that evening. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was a crumpled piece of yellow legal pad smuggled out of the county jail. It was from Arthur. "Vance," it began. "I don't expect you to read this. I am a man who built a kingdom on sand and burnt down the only bridge that mattered, family. In the silence of this cell, the only thing I hear isn't the sound of money or the board meetings. It's the sound of your mother laughing at our childhood Christmas. I was the older brother. I was supposed to protect her. Instead, I became the fire." The letter ended with a plea I never expected from a man like him. "I don't want my freedom. I want my soul back. Please, if there is a shred of the boy I used to know left in you, forgive me, not for my sake, but so the fire finally stops burning in you." I went to the prison the next day. We sat behind the glass. Arthur looked 20 years older. His hair was white, his spirit extinguished. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He just looked at me and wept. "I'm sorry," he mouthed through the glass. "I am so sorry." I looked at him, the man I had spent 2 years trying to destroy. I realized that by hating him, I was still tied to him. I was still standing in that burning house. To truly be free, I had to do the hardest thing a man can do. I picked up the phone. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, "the man you were deserves to die in here. But the brother my mother loved, he deserves one chance to seek redemption. I didn't pull strings to get him out, but I told the court I wouldn't testify for the maximum sentence. I gave him the chance to serve his time and, one day, come out to a world where he owned nothing but his guilt. I chose to forgive, not because what he did was okay, but because I refused to let his darkness define my light." As I walked out of the prison gates, the air finally felt cool. The revenge was complete, but it didn't end with a funeral. It ended with a breath. I am Silas Gray, and this has been Gray Oak Justice. Sometimes the ultimate justice isn't taking a life. It's giving someone the burden of living with what they've done.